They offer laser tag at his school.
They offer laser tag, and it was a godsend. And they just run around the school grounds, or sometimes in the school if it's raining, doing laser tag, which I think I would have enjoyed a lot if I'd have been at school. So I don't blame him for loving it.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. I am your host, Laurence. Thanks so much for joining us today. A reminder, as always, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with the show or register your interest in being a guest on a future episode. Today's guest is Corin. Corin is based in the UK. He has two kids, a 12-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. Both of his children, Corin took 6 months off within their first year, and with his daughter, he was one of the first people that was able to do this as part of government legislation within the UK. So we talk about what that experience was like for him, some of the challenges and some of the positives that came from that experience. Corin has his own podcast all about kids TV. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. He speaks about it in the episode as well. But it's a really interesting discussion that we have around kids TV, the importance of finding quality kids TV and the role that plays in the lives of raising kids. That we also talk about the various challenges of helping steer our kids towards making the best decisions and giving them the best directions to help them flourish. So lots to share, lots to listen to. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get into the conversation. So Corin, thank you so much for joining us on the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Well, I'm Corin. I'm a dad of two kids. I have a son who's 7 years old, and I have a daughter who's 12 years old, nearly 13. And as a dad, I absolutely adore being a dad. It's a key part of me. And my dadness, I feel, has expressed itself in a few ways. When my wife was pregnant with my daughter, I was one of the first people, at least that I know, and it was a pretty new piece of legislation in the UK, was to take shared parental leave. So my wife took the first 6 months off, I took the second 6 months off. And like I said, that was pretty new at that time. When my son came along about 5 years later, it had actually changed slightly to a way that people could chop and change their leave and do different chunks of leave here and there between the dad and the mum. However, we did the thing again. We did 6 months and 6 months. And actually, by that point, I was starting to hear a lot more of people doing some sort of shared parental leave. Sometimes it was the dad doing a couple of months at the end, or sometimes it was interspersed here and there between the maternity year. But yeah, that was me. That was my introduction to dadness. And since that, I suppose the other way I've leveraged my dad skills into what I do is I started a podcast based on talking to the people who create children's TV. And I did that because having two kids who have got that 5-year gap, it means I got 5 years worth of kids TV to a certain level, then had to start again from the bottom, rather than two kids growing up pretty much watching the same thing. I had two kids watching different things, and I was able to sample the whole gamut of content. And so I started my podcast about 6 months ago, and it combined a bit of what I do for my work and a bit of what I do as a dad, really.
That's so cool. Yeah, let's just talk a little bit more about your podcast, because I think you're kind of touching on a subject that my wife brings up with me quite a lot, is that she'll look at me kind of like nodding along or singing along, or I'll be like humming a tune to like one of the shows that my kids are watching. And they're just like, you don't put that show on fully for them, do you? Like you kind of, you encourage certain shows because you enjoy it. And I was like, well, yeah, like why not? Like if there is something that I identify as enjoying, it's not just enjoyment for my entertainment. I enjoy it because there's often like a learning aspect involved as well. Like as a qualified teacher, I can kind of see some of these aspects. Would you kind of like identify with that as well? Like it's not just you seeing your kids react to it. Like you're actually seeing the positivity within it, and you're seeing the quality of some content versus maybe some other content that is lacking.
Yeah, I'm glad you used the word quality, because that I think is absolute key. for several reasons. First of all, when your children get into a program, they really get into it and they will watch it time and time again. So to have something that's decent quality and doesn't grate your nerves is really important. Have something that you can enjoy watching together to talk about afterwards and use as part of imaginative play or ask questions about. That's great. When you found a program where you can do a bit of that with your kids, that's great. Now, I don't expect everyone to sit down all day, every day, watching everything that their kids watch and ask them to write an essay on it. But it's about just knowing who the main characters are, knowing a bit about the story and the adventures they go on. So you can ask them, I saw in that episode the Octonauts came across a vampire squid. What did you find out about a vampire squid? And asking questions like that. So, yeah, and having been through two kids that have grown up on different TV, and sometimes they've watched the same things, and so I watched it over and over again. Quality really shone out. Some things were definitely much better than others. Some things I wanted to engage with. There were some things that my son was watching when he was very young, but my daughter, who was a little bit older, could enjoy at the same time. And I usually think those things where you got some crossover between different ages, my son, my daughter, and even myself and my wife, if we could all watch it together, that's a sign of a pretty good program.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think we're not going to go too far down the rabbit hole of screen time and devices, I hope. I mean, we can do if it's something that you're interested in. But it's obviously, it's kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about television shows and the positives related to television shows. And I think I relate to what you're talking about in terms of engaging with that. And it becomes this thing outside of the screen with which they're engaging. If it's a world, a universe, like both my sons are quite into Thomas the Train, and that goes back decades and decades and decades, like to my childhood, my dad's childhood, there's so much history there, there's so much story there, and the character development, and we make up our own stories, and we have the trains, and so as you're alluding to, it becomes this thing that's not just on the television or the iPad, it's exploring and imaginative play and all other beneficial aspects of it. Do you have to approach specifically screen time in any certain way within your household?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been conscious of screen time and how much my kids are watching. I mean, let's be honest, if the kids didn't get some screen time in their day, they probably wouldn't eat because I wouldn't have time to make them dinner. So there's always...
Yeah.
I think every parent occasionally just needs that bit of time when your child is engaged with something and they know they're going to sit still and watch it, and then you can maybe get on with a few things. It's absolutely necessary, but it's about making sure that time isn't too long. And as I said, for me, it's about quantity, not quality. It's not giving them an iPad and expect them to sit there all afternoon on it. It's about, okay, here's your allotted screen time. What do you want to watch? Let's make a conscious decision about what you're going to watch. And if it's something that we can engage with afterwards, all the better. It's active versus passive. While the watching can be quite passive, there's so much active stuff you can do afterwards. I mean, for example, my daughter watched a bit of Thomas when she was younger. My son got very into it as well. I have a nephew who is very into Thomas, and between all three of them, we used to play a game called Guess the Engine, where you thought of an engine and the kids, or you ask the kids questions, a bit like 20 questions. You had to use various questions to narrow down who is it. Are they a steamy or are they a diesel? Are they narrow gauge or do they go on a big railway? Into colour. The only question we can ever ask was, are they a girl or boy? Because of the world of Thomas, that suddenly shrinks the options down if it's a girl. But so we had this game that we could actively engage in. That's something we used to play in the car, sometimes at the dinner table, and taking that world into learning about here's how to ask questions. And soon the kids start to realize, okay, if I say the difference between are you narrow gauge or are you on the big railway, that halves the possible things. And if I ask the right, rather than are you Scarloey, that's a question that's can only have one answer, and won't necessarily be the right one. So again, active versus passive, having different ways to engage afterwards.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I think that can apply to any quality like television programming, and I think just taking that bit of time to invest into it is such a key part of it. And there must be so many people listening to us talk about Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends, and I know exactly what you're talking about with Narrow Gauge and Skarloey and all of his friends and the different colors and like you said, as it was a story world that's existed for such a long time, there is like 90% male characters because it was like created in the 40s. But we have the whole set. We have all the books, the 68 book collection thing, and like my boys love like reading them because they're 3-in-1. They'll just sit there and flick through the pages and things. But they'll get there and they will read it eventually, I'm sure. And yeah, I think what you're getting at is such a key thing. I think it can apply to all these different things. So I hope that's a good takeaway for someone that's maybe thinking of how to engage, because screen time is such a huge topic that comes up. And I've met parents that do the whole no screen time until they start school or whatever. And it's just like, you're just making your life difficult at that point. As you said, you need to be able to leave them for a moment and just make them dinner or whatever. So a good approach to have for sure. I want to circle back to the age gap. You mentioned it a little bit about kind of the television they engage with. 12 and 7, that's actually a similar age gap to me and my older brother, is about 5 years.
All right.
How you found having that age gap with the kids growing up? Like, what has been some of the main challenges, and what have you found as some of the kind of positives that maybe other parents don't experience?
I mean, it's hard because I've only had 2 kids, and I've only ever had an age gap. So the positives I really take from it was that I had 5 years to really get to know my daughter and had just a fantastic time with her. I took that time off, but even after that, we used to do so much together, and we had a really, really nice time, and I could concentrate on her. I mean, I think the flip side of that was actually when my son came along and we had a new baby, and it was back in that craziness of having a new baby. I felt like, oh my God, I can't give my daughter the time I used to. And I really missed, that just being able to just hang out and, not have demands on my time. But there's been so many positives. They are generally good friends. They bicker like any siblings do, but my daughter, I think, is pretty protective of her brother. She's a very, very good older sister in general, and they get on really nicely in general. I think my son has a bigger vocabulary probably because of her. He looks up to her and sees her as someone to respect and emulate, and she's a great role model. So there's so many positives to it. There's the occasional challenges, and that feeling of just when things were getting easier with my daughter, when you have your first child, there are those milestones of, okay, now we're out of nappies, and okay, now we can get rid of the buggy, and we'll get rid of some of this clutter, and it all starts again, instead of just living with clutter for a certain amount of time, and generally they start to phase out pretty similar time. But it was part of it, and they're great kids, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to hear, and I always like to hear those positives coming from parents and kind of being able to analyze these kind of situations. And yeah, of course, you only have your kids. It's not like you can compare them to parenting another set of kids. But I really do like hearing these different stories. My boys are just under 2 years apart. We kind of wanted to. Well, to be honest, we were just like, let's just do it. We don't know what's going to happen. Let's just see if we can go again, so to speak. And yeah, he came along, and we're very happy that we haven't had to think about this, because both me and my wife have siblings that have quite big gaps. So yeah, we always thought to ourselves like, oh, there must be this time when, yes, like you said, you get rid of all your stuff and then you have to get it all back. Like, is it the same stuff that you've given to someone else, and it's like 3 other babies have now used this buggy, and now you're getting it back, and just like, oh, right, we're back here again, really. But we just wanted to to kind of push through, and the challenges that we face will be different to you, but we all kind of come through it and are able to look back on those times with the positives and how it's impacted our families.
And how do your boys relate to each other? How do they sort of, does one look up to the other, or do they feel more like peers in any way?
I mean, the younger one definitely, kind of similar to what you said with the vocab. My 3-year-old, he turns 4 in January. He is by far and away like more advanced than, with his vocabulary at least, than like a lot of 3-year-olds, let's say, especially when we're in like a lot of international settings, being expats, where a lot of international children have more than one language, and like all these parents will come up to me and be, "Oh, he speaks so brilliantly. He's got so many words." And it's like, yeah, because he's only really got one language. Like, you're teaching your kid 2 or 3 languages at home. Like, give them a break. Like, they're not going to be that far ahead. Don't worry about it. But he is very animated with talking, and he loves numbers. He nearly knows his timetable. He knows his timetable nearly up to 10. He's just mastering his 9 times table now, and he's 3. He's just talking of TV shows. He really got into number blocks. Like,
There you go.
Number blocks was his thing. He just wants it. He consumes it. We've got he'll just like watch 3 or 4 episodes, and then he'll like just almost tell us back the script of an episode or the song or whatever, and then it's just in his brain, and he's learned these things. And I think the younger one is learning a lot from him, just being around him and copying him, doing the same things as him. So it's great. They are 2 peas in a pod at times, and then it's just when the younger one is not able to communicate as well his needs and feelings, and then he hits and screams and all the rest of it, because he's still 1. He's nearly 2 years old. He'll be 2 in December. But
goodness,
yeah, it's fun, and I think that's the thing, is that I think when we were able to look back on these times when they're kind of up before starting primary school properly, it's just a bit of fun, like, and how we can kind of take away from it these positives. Have you found many differences between having a boy and having a girl?
In some ways, yes. I think the biggest just different personalities. So I think my daughter has a lot of me and my wife in her.
Right.
Almost quite, not necessarily ADHD, but almost in the way that we like to keep busy. We like to move on to different things. We like to go, go, go. My son is a lot calmer, a lot more thoughtful. He he's very good company for granddads on either side, because make huge train track with a granddad, or a Lego creation with a granddad, and he works at granddad pace. He makes amazing things, but just methodically just goes through it, and so it's a nice situation for him. But he's great as well. So the differences are personality, as far as I can tell. And we did try to be not too gendered in toys and how we approach things. But I have to say, my son loves trains and Lego, and my daughter's a bit more about people and interacting with people. She's a great artist, but she's also great at other things like maths. She's a great mathematician. She's a fantastic footballer. I do not have a sporting bone in my body, and she's a fantastic footballer. So I don't know how that happened. And my son is a bit less into sports, but we're gradually finding activities he does like to do, like swimming and laser tag, which they offer at his school, which is great.
They offer laser tag at his school.
They offer laser tag, and it was a godsend, because he wasn't really taking into the team sports. It kind of coincided with a explosion of interest in Star Wars, and so that works pretty nicely in our favor.
Do they do it at the school, or do they go to the local arena?
They have an external company who come in with a bunch of laser tag packs, and they just run around the
Wow.
school grounds, or sometimes in the school if it's raining, doing laser tag, which I think I would have enjoyed a lot if I'd have been at school. So I don't blame him for loving it.
Mm.
So yeah, he has great fun, does that every week, just runs around and gets all that energy out.
I'm sure many listeners are listening to you who are very envious of this. I'm sure they would have loved to have played war or soldier with laser tag at their school as their like extracurricular of choice. That sounds amazing.
It is good. It is good. I did worry about the sort of firearms aspect of it, but he enjoys it and
Yeah.
in its activity. And yeah, he would be more happy just staying at home playing Lego if we didn't force him to do certain things. And this is something he likes, so we've had to weigh it up and just make a choice on that.
I wanted to mention that actually. Just it's something that's often interested me. Like I think every parent comes into a lot of these things with their own, not baggage, but their own experience of how their parents manage them in terms of whatever you want to call it, extracurriculars, whether it be music or sports or what have you. And I think it's one of those things that parents do tend to do a little bit differently. So, like you said, your daughter is really into football and she's a great footballer, but you wouldn't identify as being kind of super into it. How do you have like an agreed upon system with your wife in terms of they have to be doing something, but if they show that they're not keen, we can change it around? How do you kind of land on her liking football and him enjoying Laser Quest or laser tag?
A combination of giving opportunities and my daughter was much more spotting the opportunity with football. She was really
Right.
she started to take an interest in football when the Lionesses were in the Euros 4 years ago, and she started to become very interested in it through watching and wanted to take part. And so when she went to secondary school, we found her a local club, and she started playing a little bit at school as well. So we wanted her to try it out, and luckily she loved it. There had been other activities in the past. She was doing piano and she was actually pretty good, but we were struggling with finding a music teacher that she was really gelling with. And also, when she went to secondary school, she suddenly had homework. She had a longer time getting to school, longer time back. And although she is very musical and she was good at the piano, we were asking her to do it was starting to become a massive chore. To do the practice and to constantly ask her to do the practice long enough was becoming more of a chore than a joy. And we had to take the decision, where are the scales at the moment between, enjoyment and pushing to make sure someone does something and it actually having a detrimental effect. And that was something we actually had to end. So we're keen for the kids to have a go at things, and we don't like them to drop out too quickly, but we will keep nudging them towards something. But you've just got to try and say, look, where are those scales between enjoyment and being pushed out of your comfort zone? Is it going too far, one way? And so it's just constantly reviewing that. Luckily, the primary school that they've both gone to, they have offered a lot of extracurricular activities. I mean, laser tag is one of them, but they have netball teams. They have a STEAM club, a STEM club,
Oh, that's cool.
and so they throw all sorts of things at them, and they can try them for half a term, which seems to be about a good amount of time to try it out, see if they like it, and then drop out if it's not quite working. My son did that with football. He did want to have a go at football, but because they had all years from the school in the football training, because it's a small school, he was finding he was a bit overwhelmed by the bigger kids. He wasn't quite into it and didn't quite have that drive to do it. So we ended up putting him out after half a term. And yeah, hence needing to find a different sporty outlet for him.
That's cool. No, I think that's a really good approach to it. And it's something that I always like hearing these sorts of stories as someone who has preschoolers, I guess you call them 3 and 1, is it's something that comes up in the conversation between my wife and I, and like comparing our own experiences, as I kind of mentioned. And I think it's just, you have to be on the same page when it comes to the parenting aspect of that, because once they're of this age and they're trying to make these decisions, if they're trying to play one parent off each other, or the parents just aren't aligned with beliefs and like, oh yeah, you can stop, it's fine, like, I care about your feelings, like, yeah, I'd like to hear kind of how things have gone through, and I think that's a really useful thing for parents of smaller kids for sure with these things. I wanted to circle back into the parental leave. So you mentioned that you took 6 months off very early on after this legislation was passed. So you would have started when your daughter was 6 months, is that right?
Yeah, when she was 6 months.
Yeah, can you just tell me a bit about what it was like when she was 6 months to 12 months? If it was quite early on with the legislation, I'm wondering, did you find there was a little bit of abrasion in terms of being a dad, being the primary caregiver as a father at that time?
Yeah, it was. There was a few points about it that were a bit tough, and sort of being one of the first people to do it, breaking new ground. So I was working for a pretty small company at the time. I think there was probably about 4 of us at the time. So to tell my boss that actually a quarter of his workforce was going to be off for 6 months was a bit tough for him, but I had to explain, I'm very sorry, but it's the law. You have to let me. So that was quite tricky, and just the sort of more social aspects of it, really. At the time, we were living in an area surrounded by people we'd done our NCT, our antenatal classes with, and so they were people who were going to a lot of the baby groups and baby classes in the area. So I would turn up to these classes and see very familiar faces and have a chat with them, which was quite good. Now, actually, when it came to having my son, who was later, and we'd moved to a slightly different area, when I was off with him and going to classes with new people, there were a few more dads, but I did find it. The mums seemed to gravitate towards each other, and the dads slightly got just left alone at times, which could be a bit tricky. So yeah, gradually had to sort of just chat to people, but I was always envious that the mums seemed to find it very easy and natural, whereas as a dad I found it a bit harder, and I'd probably had to go to a class about 6 times before I'd even just to start up a conversation with one of the mums. But yeah, I don't know if that was me or whether that was sort of the way other people acted, but it did feel slightly different.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think that a lot of dads would identify with that. Where I live in the Netherlands, it's very common now for a lot of parents will kind of schedule their time in terms of one parent might have one day off a week. So they call it like mama dag or papa dag. So like mummy's day or daddy's day. So like they might work 4 days a week. They might still try and do 40 hours a week, but they're doing one day with the kids. So a lot of the stuff that I've done with kids here, like kind of like you said, the majority within a setting is mums, but there might be one or two other dads there. And it can be weird sometimes. I always feel like, well, they're showing solidarity between each other. It's not like I'm the only dad here. There are other dads here, yet we're just all on like little islands. It's like they're the main body of land, like kind of doing everything, but we can't seem to get together at all. And it's just kind of, I don't know if it's because of like vulnerability, and men don't want to be vulnerable, and men don't want to put themselves out there and try and, just kind of say, oh, it'd be nice to talk to someone at one of these things, I don't know if that's kind of part of it, but I think there's a lot of dads that do experience this when they are caring for their children. And anything else kind of in those early stages of like looking after a baby? Because, I think a lot of people out there wouldn't expect a man to take on the primary care role when a child is only 6 months old, when you kind of think about maternal instincts and even just breastfeeding. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the challenges you might have had to go through?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I never really thought about it, because I think I always had a hankering to be a dad at some level. So for me, I had a real strong paternal instinct. I always wanted to be a dad. I was always keen to be a dad, and the idea of being able to share the time and look after a 6-month-old was exciting and interesting. And even before that point, whenever I was at home, I was doing equal care, or if not more care, so that my wife could have a bit of a rest. So those skills were there. The big thing I did feel was perhaps a little bit of guilt, because a baby from 0 to 6 months can be quite reasonably sedate in terms of not being able to do so much. And I feel like the development milestones between 6 months and a year are so huge, can be crawling. My daughter actually started walking at 11 months. And so they go from being very much a baby to being this walking thing that can almost start to say a few sounds and words. So there was a slight guilt that, hey, I'm getting all these amazing developmental milestones on my watch. I'm so lucky. And my wife had the breastfeeding and the up and down with the sleep schedule so much more than I got. And there was a routine in place when I took over, and so I was able to schedule my day between preparing a bit of food when the nap was happening for the evening. And I was perhaps felt a little bit guilty at times.
It sounds like a very selfless dad, the way you talk about it at this stage. I'm sure Corin of 12 years ago or 7 years ago, would have been seeing the challenges or the struggles of it, or the long days of it, or what have you. But that's what's so beautiful about being able to make the decision of taking extra time, because when your kids are your age, the age that your kids are, of 7 and 12, you are able to kind of look back on it and just be like, it was amazing. And if anything, I almost had it too good. That's such a selfless way to approach things. It's a very humble way, and a very refreshing approach to fatherhood. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious though, you mentioned the first company you're working with was 4 people. I was really curious of how your company reacted when you got back, like when you returned to work. How did that feel?
It did. I don't remember it feeling too weird, I'll be honest with you. I was kind of keen to get back into it. I felt like I'd done a good 6 months, and I was ready to get back into it. Felt refreshed. So both times I've been on parental leave, I've always felt things were going to feel more different than they did when I got back. If you see what I mean. I always thought, oh my gosh, so much is going to have changed, but actually, generally not that much changed. The only difference being is when I went on parental leave with my son, my company moved offices whilst I was away, and so when I came back, I just had to turn up to a building and say, "Oh, hi, I work here. Do you know where I need to go?" And find out my pass and get everything sorted. And I wandered into the office and had to wait until I saw someone I knew and say, "Right, can you tell me where the toilets are? I don't know." And so that was a weird thing. But I don't remember there being that much difference really between the start of the 6 months and being off. I adjusted pretty well, and it came from knowing that I was doing the right thing, that having time off with my kids when they were that young was absolutely the right thing to do. And so there was nothing that was going to stop me from doing it. And when I got back, I was so pleased that I'd done it. And any sort of work emergencies that come in that time, I'll just have to deal with. And in fact, being at a desk, talking to adults instead of, thinking through the schedule every day for your child and their naps and what they're going to eat and all those kind of things, and keeping the house as tidy as possible. So all those things went away, and it was a bit of a relief to be back around adults again.
Yeah. I mean, I've probably mentioned it in other episodes, but there is a big heart behind creating this podcast of just talking to other adults as being a stay-at-home dad. And it becoming, quite isolating. And
Yeah.
if you're not able to kind of fit in those meaningful conversations with other adults, it can be very, lonely. And, I think there's two really important parts of like looking after small kids. And I tell people that I'm a stay-at-home dad, and a lot of people's like imagination of it is, oh, you just like go out for coffee every day with your kid, and like you just go out and meet up with other parents, and you just hang out with them and you talk to them or whatever. You must have so much social time. And like at times, if you were to look on the outside, maybe that's what it looks like. But often, if you're spending time with your young child, your primary focus is on them to keep them safe and happy and healthy and so what have you. So you're not really ever having too many meaningful conversations. And quite often, you're sharing time with people who are parents of children that happen to be the age of your children, who might not
Mm,
necessarily be the sort of people that you would become friends with in a different world. They might not have the
mm.
same interests or values or beliefs or whatever. And that's fine. But that's not necessarily that person is going to be super energizing to you or super fulfilling to you, because you're going to keep your guard up about some topics because you're just not going to go to some certain areas.
And the conversations will generally be about kids as well. So you'll find yourself
Yeah.
at a baby group and you'll be talking about your kids and the things your kids have done, and it'll be focused on that. And actually, what you want to talk about is films or something completely different.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, a part of parenting that maybe you don't want to share with someone who you only see like every now and then, maybe something that you're struggling with that maybe you don't want to share with like another mum, for example. So there's a big world of it, and obviously that's a big heart of like making this podcast, which I'm sure if anyone's listened to other episodes, that I'm sure it's come up at some time. I can't
Mm.
remember exactly. But that's a bit of a segue actually into something that we spoke a little bit about on email when we were talking about the successes and stresses of becoming a dad. You mentioned to me just worrying about so many different things. Like as a father, we have to worry about our relationships with our partner, our kids, our own emotions. What do you think's the biggest worry that you have when it comes to your parenting life?
That I am doing something wrong, that the little decision I'm taking at that moment is
Mm.
ruining my child in 50 years' time.
The
That the
butterfly effect.
lollipop I let them
Yeah.
do have now, or the lollipop I don't let them have now, they're either going to grow
Oh
up to
yeah.
be obese and unhappy, or they're going to grow up to feel miserable that they were neglected by their father. So you
Resentful. Yeah.
feel like whatever choice you make, the long term effect's going to be awful. Um, and
Mm.
so you think, oh my God, I'm ruining my child with everything that you do. You know, letting them have their own way, not letting them have their own way, saying they can do
Mm.
that, saying they can't do that, and you think, oh my goodness, you know, whatever one you do, it's a long way down the line. They're going to be miserable and hate you.
So nothing big then. Just
Nothing big.
no, just
But then that's why I think is the big takeaway from that is just don't sweat the small stuff and
yeah.
try and think on a bigger level how you're treating your child and what you're doing with them, and you know, take a deep breath and it's all right. But yeah, you think every little thing you're doing is going to have this massive knock-on effect, but actually I always liken parenting. It's not like painting a wall where you just paint it and it's suddenly a different color. It's more like adding on layers of varnish on something. So you're
Mm.
gradually building up a layers and layers and layers of something to be the finished product. It's
Mm.
gradually doing it rather than suddenly one big thing is going to have a massive effect.
Mm. For sure, that's a really nice way to put things. And how would you say that you control your own emotions when parenting, when dealing with your children? Is it something that comes up frequently for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do struggle with that. I do struggle with that, and I think it for me the trickiest thing has been actually the move to working at home the majority of the time that actually I get, there's a period in the afternoon, usually about 5 o'clock, where it's like that overlap time between home time and the end of work time. So there's probably a couple of pressing work things I need to try and wrap up, but there's also the feeling that, hey, I've got to get dinner done, and now both kids are home, I've got to do this and that. So it is a confluence of those things that gets quite stressful for me. I know it's a flashpoint, but it's still a point that flashes, and still a point where I can get quite stressed, quite tetchy. So I have to work on that. And I to be honest, I'd like to be better at dealing with it, and I have tried to do work on it, but it's tricky, and it's just knowing that there's a bit of a trigger point there is important. And we do try and work on it. And actually, some of the things we've tried to do is like make meal times, really think about having meal times that are easier to prepare or have been prepared in advance. If I'm slightly quieter on my work day, I like to use my lunchtime when I'm working from home to actually prepare a meal for the evening. And if I'm really being a super amazing dad, it might be double portions that I can then freeze some for the future. I am not some domestic wizard, but that sometimes happens. And so, yeah, it's about knowing where those points are and trying to head them off, and also just being aware of how my brain works.
Yeah, that last point is really important actually as well. Like I'm not a brain expert or anything, but I've listened to a few podcasts recently that talk about emotions, and the emotional response that we deliver is just a neural pathway. It's something that your brain is used to doing. It's like a muscle memory, in the same way that muscle memory affects other muscles. It's something that it's just used to doing, and it's used to solving a problem by doing something, which might be clenching your fist, or putting something down aggressively, or closing a door aggressively, which is things that happen to me all the time when like certain things haven't gone my way. Not my way, but you know what I mean, when the stresses start to get up, of like the 1-year-old screaming all day and things aren't going to plan or whatever. So it's that reflection and like bringing it up and talking about it with the wife, and once the kids are old enough, I assume like kind of talking about it with them as well, to just kind of be honest with them. It's like, look, Dad struggles with this thing, so let's talk about it. Like, let's make sure that we're all open about it, and apologize if need be. The dinner thing though is interesting, because what I try to do is like batch cook. Maybe like on a Saturday, I might cook like a huge thing of chili, like 4 or 5 portions of it, and freeze a bunch of it. And then I normally try and get dinner started at 5 and on the table by like 5:40. So that's just a case of like, I'll be heating the thing up, and then I kick in the rice or the pasta or whatever. So like our meals are one of like 4 or 5 things. And that's just the way it is right now, because it's just, that's what I can make in a big batch, and it's like quite time efficient when I do the big cook, and that's just how it is. And like I would tip my hat to anyone that tries to like, I'm going to prepare this meal today and like start it from scratch today, because I don't have the brain energy to do that at 5 o'clock. I just want to go in and put something on the stove, turn it on, and like cook some pasta or whatever, and say, here you go. So, we've all got our own little hacks, so to speak, to try and get the food on the table. I mean, food for children could be a whole other episode, I think, of healthcare, nutrition, what have you. But that's a rabbit hole for another day, I'm sure. One of the questions I really love to ask guests as we come towards the end of our conversation is thinking back to that time before you became a dad. So I'm guessing about 13 years ago. You said your daughter's nearly 13. So do you think there's any advice that Corin back then could have heard that would have helped him out in those early stages of being a father?
Yes, I would have 2 pieces of advice. I think the first is a bit like I I said before, don't sweat the small stuff. It's more about just being there as buffers either side of your child as they go about their way. You're just sort of nudging them from side to side. You're not controlling them. They're not a remote control car. They are a little walking toy that needs to find their own way. And sometimes you just need to nudge them away from the edge, but it's they've got to find their own path. So that's my sort of emotional piece of advice. And my practical piece of advice was the advice I would give to myself just before my daughter was born is don't get a load of homebrew brewing in the baby's nursery 2 weeks before they are born, because the homebrew is going to explode. It's going to spill out over the carpet of the nursery, and your wife will not be happy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Did no one give you that advice when you made that decision?
They didn't. It's very specific advice, but if I'd have heeded it, then it wouldn't be talked about today like it did. Gets brought up perhaps once a week still at this point.
I'm sure.
So yes, and that was the end of my homebrewing adventure as well.
I don't know. I've never done it myself. I've thought about it. I'm quite into beer in general. But yeah, from the people I've spoken to that have done it before, or even like small time like brewers, would often say, I think everyone has that experience of it exploding at least once. So
yes, yeah, and mine was at the wrong time, the wrong place. So yeah, that kind of ended it for me.
Multi carpet and multi walls, I'm sure, for a few days in that sense. Wow. Well, Corin, thanks for sharing with us today. Why don't you just tell the listeners where they can catch your podcast about where you talk to people within the kids' TV world?
My podcast is called Beyond the Broom Cupboard, and for anyone who is completely mystified by that title, it is the broom cupboard used to be the area where the presenter around children's TV used to sit on the BBC between about 1982 to 1994 or so. So it was called the Broom Cupboard. So for people of a certain age, the Broom Cupboard is where children's TV was hosted from. And yeah, Beyond the Broom Cupboard podcast is on all podcast platforms. Beyond the Broom Cupboard pod on Instagram as well. And take a listen.
Yep, cool. I'll put all the links up in the description for anyone that wants to check it out. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing all your stories with us, and thanks for joining us on the Dad Dialogue. It's been awesome talking to you today.
No worries. Thanks, Laurence. It's been really great fun. Thanks for having me on.
And there's another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you to Corin for coming on the show and sharing his time with us. You can check out his podcast called Beyond the Broom Cupboard. I'll leave some links in the description. I'd really recommend going and check it out if you have any interest in kids TV. He has lots of interesting guests. Well worth a listen. I really appreciated hearing from Corin, and our discussion about quality TV really has impacted my decisions and how I kind of base some discussions and games around the kids' TV that my children consume. And we've even implemented the Guess the Engine game that he was talking about, and my son loves playing that. So I really do think that's a super important thing, super interesting thing to think about, the way that we kind of involve kids' TV characters within our daily lives and allowing our kids to enjoy them, not just when sat in front of a screen. So again, huge thank you to Corin for coming on the show. Do check out his podcast. Thank you for listening to us today. Go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you want to come on the show yourself. I'd really love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a great day, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.